It started 6 weeks ago. I was stationed on the Odyssey, a state-of-the-art research vessel funded by an unnamed private organization. In hindsight, the secrecy should have been a red flag. The team was handpicked specialists in marine biology, deep-sea robotics, and genetics. There was talk of mapping uncharted trenches and cataloging new species, but whispers on board suggested something else. A few of us suspected military involvement. The equipment we carried wasn't just for exploration, it was built for extraction. Our mission was centered on the Mariana Trench, specifically a region known as the Hattel Scar. A recent seismic event had revealed a cavern system deeper than anything previously recorded. The government wanted to know what was down there, and we were their eyes. The first dive was strange. Our submersible, Leviathan, descended into the depths, equipped with cameras, sonar, and robotic arms. I remember watching the monitors as the trench walls swallowed us. The further we went, the quieter it became. At around 10,000 meters, the sonar began picking up faint echoes, large, moving shapes just beyond the range of visibility. Probably whales, one of the engineers said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Whales don't dive this deep. Whatever was out there, it was massive, and it was watching us. On the second dive, everything changed. The Leviathan entered one of the newly exposed caverns. The walls were lined with strange, bioluminescent algae, casting the space in a sickly green glow. As we moved deeper, the cameras caught something, a flash of movement. A tail? A fin? It was gone before we could focus, but the size of it, it was bigger than the sub itself. Then we saw it. At first, it looked like a cluster of rocks, but as we approached, the shape became clearer. It was a creature, a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and armor. Its body was elongated, its skin translucent and riddled with glowing veins. Rows of jagged teeth jutted from a gaping maw, and its eyes, God, its eyes were wrong. They weren't the eyes of an animal, they were intelligent, predatory. It wasn't afraid of us. It was curious. The creature let out a low, guttural sound like metal scraping against metal, and then, without warning, it lunged. The cameras cut out as the creature slammed into the submersible, sending us spinning. The impact nearly crushed the hull, but we managed to escape. When we returned to the surface, the Odyssey was silent. The team stared at the footage in disbelief. We discovered a new apex predator, something that wasn't supposed to exist. But instead of excitement, there was fear. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was a threat. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the dive in my mind. The creature's eyes haunted me. They were too human. That's when I stumbled upon a locked file on the ship's database. I don't know why I opened it. Curiosity, maybe. Or some part of me already knew the truth. The file contained decades of classified research. In the 1970s, the government had conducted a series of experiments aimed at creating genetically engineered marine life. The goal was to develop organisms capable of withstanding extreme conditions for military use, submersibles made of flesh, bioengineered predators. But something went wrong. The creatures were unstable, uncontrollable. They were released into the ocean as a last resort, buried in the deepest trenches where they couldn't reach the surface. Until now. The seismic event that exposed the Hattel Scar wasn't natural. It was the result of underwater detonations meant to contain the creatures. But instead of sealing them away, it had set them free. The attack began with a sound, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to resonate in the bones more than the ears. It was subtle at first, like the hum of distant machinery, but it grew louder, deeper. David, our sonar operator, was the first to notice. He had been sitting at his station, monitoring the endless blue void below us when he froze. There's something big down there, he whispered, his voice barely audible. He adjusted the controls, squinting at the monitor, and then his face turned pale. No, not something. Multiple contacts. They're surrounding us. Panic swept through the room like wildfire. Captain Hayes barked orders to confirm the readings, but the truth was already evident. The ship itself seemed to shudder as the vibrations intensified, rippling through the hull like a warning from the abyss. And then, they came. The first creature breached the surface with an explosion of water and sound, its massive body illuminated by the ship's floodlights. It was grotesque, a nightmarish fusion of biological evolution and something wrong. Its bioluminescent veins pulsed with an eerie, electric blue light that seemed to dance across its translucent skin. Rows of serrated teeth lined its gaping maw, each tooth glinting like a blade. But it wasn't the size or the teeth that chilled me to my core, it was its eyes. They were too human, too calculating, as if it understood exactly what it was doing. The creature rammed the ship with a force that felt like an earthquake. The Odyssey groaned under the impact, the metal hull screaming in protest. The first strike tore a hole in the lower decks, and water began flooding in almost immediately. Alarms blared, red lights flashing as the crew scrambled to seal off the breach, but it was already too late. I remember running through the chaos, the floor slick with seawater and blood. People screamed, their voices drowned out by the deafening roar of the creatures. One of the engineers, a man named Taurus, was pulled overboard by a massive, whip-like appendage. His scream was cut short as the creature dragged him beneath the waves, leaving only a trail of crimson in its wake. Captain Hayes was on the bridge, shouting orders into the radio, but it was futile. The creatures were toying with us, their massive forms circling the ship like sharks around a dying whale. One of them emerged from the water, its jaws snapping shut around a lifeboat. The sound of crunching metal and screams filled the air as the lifeboat was dragged under. I caught a glimpse of another creature as it breached the surface. This one was different, smaller, faster, with elongated limbs that ended in barbed claws. It clung to the side of the ship, tearing through the hull with terrifying ease. Its bioluminescent veins pulsed red, as if it were feeding off the destruction. The crew fought back with what little we had. A few of the security personnel fired flares and harpoons, but it was like throwing pebbles at a tank. The creatures didn't even flinch. They were too big, too strong, too evolved. This wasn't a hunt. It was a massacre. The ship was splitting apart, the deck tilting as the lower levels flooded. I remember the moment the Odyssey began to sink, the icy water rising around my ankles. The last thing I saw before I fled was Captain Hayes, standing at the helm, firing his flare gun at the oncoming creatures. His final scream was lost as a massive jaw closed around him, dragging him into the depths. By some miracle, I made it to one of the research pods. It wasn't designed for long-distance travel, it was more of an emergency escape capsule, equipped with basic navigation and minimal supplies. But it was my only chance. As the Odyssey sank behind me, I activated the pod's engines, descending into the water. My plan was simple: dive deep and hope the creatures wouldn't follow. But hope, as I quickly learned, was a fragile thing. The creatures weren't just predators. They were intelligent. They followed me, their glowing forms cutting through the darkness like underwater phantoms. I could see them on the pod's external cameras, their bioluminescent veins casting an eerie glow in the black void. They moved with terrifying precision, herding me like a school of fish. I pushed the pod's engines to their limit, navigating through underwater canyons and trenches in a desperate attempt to lose them. The controls shook in my hands as the pod scraped against the rocky walls, but the creatures were relentless. They were faster, smarter. At one point, I thought I'd lost them. I had entered a narrow fissure, the pod barely fitting through the jagged rocks. The sonar was silent, the water around me still. But then, the cameras picked up movement, something massive, lurking just beyond the range of visibility. And then another, and another. They were waiting for me. The pod's power was nearly depleted, the lights flickering as I drifted in the darkness. I was alone, trapped thousands of meters below the surface with no way to call for help. And the creatures were still out there, circling, waiting. When I finally surfaced, I was met by a ship. At first, I thought it was a rescue vessel, but as it drew closer, I realized something was wrong. The ship was unmarked, its black hull devoid of any insignia. Men in tactical gear pulled me aboard, their faces cold and unreadable. "You shouldn't have survived," one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion. I was taken to a sterile room, interrogated for hours. They wanted to know what I'd seen, what I knew. When I mentioned the creatures, their demeanor changed. They weren't surprised, they were afraid. That's when I realized the truth. They knew about the creatures. They had always known. The Odyssey wasn't just a research vessel, it was part of a cover-up. The seismic event that had exposed the Hadal Scar wasn't natural. It was caused by underwater detonations, a desperate attempt to seal the creatures away. But instead of containing them, it had set them free. It became clear that they had no intention of letting me go. I was a liability, someone who knew too much. But they underestimated me. During a power outage, I managed to escape, stealing a lifeboat and setting out into the open ocean. Now I'm being hunted, not just by the creatures but by the government. They want to erase every trace of this disaster, every witness. Helicopters comb the skies, patrol boats scour the waters, but the real danger lies below. The creatures are growing bolder. They've begun venturing closer to the surface, attacking fishing vessels, cargo ships, even small coastal towns. Entire crews have vanished without a trace, their ships found adrift, torn apart as if by some colossal force. The media reports these incidents as accidents, freak storms, rogue waves, but I know the truth. The ocean isn't just a place of mystery anymore. It's a war zone, and we're losing. As I record this, the boat's engine is failing. The sonar is picking up movement below large, fast-moving shapes closing in. They've found me. To whoever finds this recording, stay away from the deep. The government can't stop them. They've created something they can't control, and now we're all paying the price. The ocean is no longer ours. It belongs to them. End of recording.